In the year 1260, on the fertile plains of Palestine near the spring of Ain Jalut, history trembled at the edge of a knife. Here, two forces stood poised to decide the fate of the medieval world: the unstoppable Mongol horde, heirs to Genghis Khan's conquests, and the newly risen Mamluk Sultanate of Egypt, forged from slave soldiers turned rulers. What unfolded was more than just a clash of armies. It was the moment when the myth of Mongol invincibility was broken, when the future of the Islamic world was preserved, and when the course of global history was forever altered. To understand the weight of this battle, one must journey back through the terror of the Mongol advance. For decades, their armies swept across Asia like a storm of iron and fire. They annihilated the Khwarezmian Empire, crushed the Song dynasty in the east, and obliterated Baghdad in 1258, killing the last Abbasid caliph and leaving the once great city in smoldering ruins. Chroniclers wrote that the Tigris ran black with the ink of looted libraries and red with the blood of its people. The Mongols appeared unstoppable, their horse archers moving with unmatched speed, their discipline terrifying in its precision. Two contemporaries, they were a scourge sent by God. After Baghdad, the Mongol general Hulagu, grandson of Genghis Khan, pressed further into the Levant. In 1259, Mongol armies, allied with some Christian crusader states, captured Aleppo and then Damascus, the jewel of Syria. Minarets were toppled, streets ran with blood, and the people trembled at the thunder of hooves. "Who can stand before the wrath of the Mongols?" wrote one Syrian chronicler, yet destiny would intervene. At the very moment when Mongol banners seemed poised to sweep into Egypt itself, Hulagu was recalled eastward upon the death of the great Khan Mangi. He withdrew the bulk of his army to participate in the succession struggle, leaving behind a comparatively small force of perhaps 20,000 under his general. Kitbuka, a hardened commander of Nestorian Christian origin, in Cairo, the Mamluks watched with wary eyes. Their Sultan Qutuz, a man of iron will, had seized power in a palace coup just as the Mongol storm drew near. The Mamluks themselves were a paradox of history warrior slaves imported from the Caucasus and Central Asia, trained in the arts of war, who had risen to overthrow their masters and claim the throne of Egypt. Fiercely disciplined, bound by loyalty to one another, and raised in the saddle, they were the only force in the Islamic world still capable of standing against the Mongol tide. When Hulagu sent a letter demanding submission, warning, "Resist and you will suffer the fate of Baghdad," Qutuz made his answer not in words but in blood. He executed the Mongol envoys and hung their severed heads on the gates of Cairo. War was now inevitable. The Mamluks marched north. Their army, perhaps 24,000 strong, was commanded jointly by Sultan Qutuz and his brilliant general Baybars, a man whose cunning and military genius would one day make him Sultan himself. As they advanced through Palestine, they negotiated carefully with the Crusader states. Though Christian knights and Muslim emirs had long clashed, the fear of Mongol domination united old enemies. The Crusaders allowed the Mamluks to pass unhindered through their territory, knowing that if the Mongols triumphed, their own fragile foothold in the Holy Land would not survive. On the morning of September 3rd, 1260, the two armies met in the valley of Jezreel, near the spring of Anjalut, the spring of Goliath, a place forever linked with the memory of David's victory over the Philistine giant. The symbolism was not lost on the combatants, for once more a seemingly weaker force stood against a giant that threatened to dominate the world. The battle began with the familiar thunder of Mongol cavalry. Kitbuka hurled his horse archers against the Mamluk vanguard, their arrows darkening the sky. The Mamluks fell back, feigning retreat. It was a maneuver Baybars had carefully planned, exploiting the Mongols' confidence in their own momentum. Kitbuka, enraged and eager for swift victory, ordered a reckless pursuit. The Mongols charged headlong into the narrow valley, only to find themselves ambushed from the hills. The Mamluk cavalry erupted like a storm. Armored horsemen, wielding lances and curved sabers, slammed into the flanks of the overextended Mongols. The earth shook with the collision. Chroniclers described the clash as a thunderstorm of steel, where the cries of men and beasts mingled with the sound of clashing blades. Kutos himself is said to have thrown off his helmet so that his men could recognize him, shouting, "O Islam! O Islam!" as he led the counterattack. His cry ignited his warriors with fury. The Mongols fought with their usual ferocity, but the trap was sprung too tightly. Surrounded, outnumbered, and cut off from reinforcements, Kitbuka's men were driven back. In the chaos, Kitbuka himself was captured. Proud to the end, he refused to beg for mercy and was executed. His death broke the spirit of his troops. The Mongol army disintegrated under the relentless pressure of the Mamluks, scattering across the plains. For the first time in history, the Mongols had been decisively defeated in open battle. The aftermath was seismic. Across the Islamic world, the news spread like wildfire. The Mongols could be beaten. The aura of invincibility that had cloaked them for decades was shattered. Cities that had cowered in fear now found hope. Cairo celebrated with prayers and processions, and Kutus returned as a hero. Though he would not live long to enjoy his triumph, he was soon assassinated, paving the way for Baybars to assume power. Under Baybars, the Mamluks would forge a dynasty that ruled Egypt and Syria for centuries, defending the region not only from Mongols, but from Crusaders as well. For the Mongols, Jalut was a bitter lesson. Though Hulagu would later attempt to reclaim lost ground, the momentum was gone. The limits of Mongol expansion into the Western Islamic world had been drawn. Never again would their armies seriously threaten Egypt. In the grand sweep of history, the battle marked a turning point, the beginning of the Mongol decline in the Middle East, and the rise of the Mamluks as the protectors of Islamic civilization. The legacy of Jalut endures. For Muslims, it became a symbol of resistance, proof that even the mightiest enemy could be overcome through courage, strategy, and unity. In the West, it demonstrated the delicate balance of alliances in the medieval world, where Crusaders, Muslims, and Mongols could find themselves shifting between war and diplomacy in an ever-changing game of survival. Archaeologists and historians still study the battle site, piecing together the movements of armies and the echoes of that fateful day. Today, when one stands in the Jezreel Valley and gazes at the rolling hills, it is hard to imagine the thunder of hooves and the clash of steel that once shook this quiet landscape. Yet the memory of Jalut lives on, not just in chronicles, but in the course of world history. It was here that the Mongol tide met its first great reversal. Here that Egypt's warrior slaves proved themselves the saviors of an entire civilization, and here that the myth of invincibility was broken forever. This has been the story of the Battle of Jalut, a moment where the fate of nations hung by a thread, and where the courage of a few determined men reshaped the destiny of millions. As with all our efforts to bring history to life, such storytelling requires dedication, research, and passion. If you value the preservation of these stories and the power they hold to remind us of who we are and where we come from, we invite you to support this work. Together, we can ensure that the echoes of the past continue to inspire the present and guide the future.